one choice isn't right. Choice isn't right. Choice isn't right.
Talking to Lucy Mason, and we're particularly in this interview wanting to talk to her about a group she was part of some 20 years ago now called Young and Powerful, which was part of the Alliance for Inclusive Education, and some of the actions that they took during that time, particularly two, one about a member of theirs who was being very badly treated in the school system in Nottinghamshire, and secondly about some direct action when David Blunkett was still Secretary of State for Education and had actually committed to developing inclusion but wasn't actually doing it towards the end of his time. So Lucy, let's start first of all with Young and Powerful. What was Young and Powerful?
So Young and Powerful was a young people-led campaign group that we set up, I guess, in, when would it have been, the late 90s. The idea originally was to give young people who were in mainstream school and who were disabled a space to meet with other young people in that situation, because a lot of us were the first or one of the first in our schools. We maybe didn't have other young people that shared those experiences around us. But I think because a lot of us were being very well included, we wanted to bring our friends into that as well, so it became a group for young disabled people and non-disabled friends to support each other whilst kind of on this journey of being included in the mainstream, but also to campaign to make that better for other young people and to make it more so that more young people had the opportunity to be in mainstream education. I think there was probably, in the beginning, between 20 and 30 young people, and we had young people with a range of impairments and a bunch of non-disabled young people. Siblings were involved in that, lots of people, school friends were involved in that. The group grew, obviously, as we kind of got more notoriety, I suppose. A lot of the children in it, parents were involved with inclusion and sort of campaigning, so I think were a big asset to us because they really supported us, to me, and were good allies to the group. I've been part of other young people's rights groups and probably modelled it a bit on those. So I was part of something called Article 12, which was a group that was there to promote Article 12 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is a voice in all matters that concern or affect you, basically, right to a voice. So we were really taking that principle and applying it to young disabled people and their friends around this particular issue. So we hung out a lot, we had a lot of meetings, we got an office, we got funding, and we had staff that we pretended to know how to manage when we were 13-year-olds. We spent a lot of time spinning around in office chairs and eating pizza and being very silly. But I think it gave us a real sense of like community and ownership, and it gave us time to like practice leading things, meetings, how to chair, how to set an agenda, how to sort out conflicts within the group. A lot of the people that were in that have gone on to do quite similar work, which I think is interesting. I think it was a very like informative time. We had residential meetings, we had a lot of fun too. And then we guess, because we built close relationships with each other, we were then able to kind of know each other well enough to know who needed support and what campaigns we needed to set up. This was well before social media, so this was pre-Facebook, this is when, texting was like a big deal, if you could text on your phone. So yeah, we spoke on the phone a lot, but we had regular steering committee meetings, which is the way we kind of kept ourselves going. One of the things that I think was the most sort of successful bits of action that we carried out as a group was when we were trying to support a really good friend of mine, Marisa, who's somebody I've known pretty much our whole life since we were very little, who had been sort of, not by her family, not by her mum, but by the system, had been deemed someone that wasn't really worth educating. She had really complex impairment, communication issues, and was in special school for a while, if I remember rightly, and then maybe not even in school for a while, but really, really wanted a mainstream education, really wanted a chance to be educated alongside her peers and actually have a decent academic education, because she's really like fiercely intelligent. and she had won the right to go to mainstream school, but had got there and it had just been awful. From what I remember, they did things like didn't use the grant they'd been given to build her a disabled toilet. Instead, they built like a special room to keep her in on her own and bussed her for miles every day to the toilet somewhere else. And I always remember the story about when she took, I think it was like birthday party invitations to school to invite friends over, and they confiscated them. And I think as a child that story probably resonated with us, because you can just imagine what that would feel like when you're that age. I think we were all pretty furious that she was being treated like it, and it was also very clear that the Senko at the school didn't believe that she was someone who was intelligent or worth use. It wasn't a use educating her, and she was very patronising. So I think we all kind of wanted for that experience to go better for her. So originally, I think the intention was to make the school do a better job of including her, but actually what happened in the end is she got moved to a much better, more inclusive mainstream school. I think we did a sit-in at the town hall kind of in Nottingham, which is where the Department for Education was. And I don't think they quite know what to do, because it had been, the office had been taken over by a whole load of disabled children. How are you supposed to deal with that without looking like not a nice person? So I remember sitting there for a day, at least, I think, until the head of the education department agreed to come and meet with us. At which point we went in and had a big round table session and kind of just said what we were concerned about, gave Marisa space to say why they were there, what had gone so wrong at this school, what they really wanted, and we all kind of advocated for them too. And we had the media there, so there was quite a lot of pressure on them. And I think actually the guy was pretty shocked at the reality of what was happening to her as a young person. I remember she cried in that meeting, and I remember there being quite a reaction to that. There was a lot of it was quite an intense emotional meeting. I think at the time he was slightly sceptical about whether or not what we were saying was fully true, or it was a slight over-dramatisation of some young people. So he said to us at the end of the meeting that he was going to go and investigate the situation, really. And I'm not sure at that time of whether or not we thought that was sort of just platitudes or whether or not that was going to be really effective. But he invited us to come back and meet with him again in the following school holiday, which we did. And in between then and when we first met him, he went off and did an investigation of what was been going on. And from what I remember, when we came back for that second meeting, he said that he'd looked into it and actually things were worse than we described, and he was really, really shocked and horrified at what had happened. And at that point offered Marisa a place at any mainstream school in Nottingham that she chose, and that they would resource it properly, and that she could kind of have a fresh start with a staff team that were actually behind her education and not literally getting in the way of it. And the impact of that on the group was that it made us feel like we could do something and be effective. And I think I noticed how many of my friends now feel really hopeless about direct action and protest, and it never works. And actually my experience, maybe coming through the inclusion movement, has been that it can shift things. So maybe I don't feel as hopeless about things, maybe that's an impact. But I remember at the time I think we all felt quite empowered. It was great to see Marisa just be so much happier and get a really good education and build a friendship circle and get really good PAs and just build a life that's really amazing.
I'll read you what Marisa now, looking back, thinks about this. The effect the campaign had on my life. I was 12 years old when we had the demonstration, and after the campaign I moved to another secondary school into year 9. This school was nearer to my home and took seriously what I and my family were asking for, a chance to take part in ordinary lessons. I got the assistance I needed and began to flourish. I loved the learning and felt satisfied and stretched. 2 years later I got 6 GCSEs and went on to do A-levels at a further education college, and eventually got to university degree in English. To me, the education was a lifeline, because because at last I could do what I knew I could. I need assistance for everything except thinking. So I wanted to express my thinking. I wanted to access to knowledge, to stretch my thinking, and to learn amongst others. This exchange of thinking and ideas is a wonderful thing, and to deprive anyone of that right is cruel and harmful. Communication and education are human rights, and disabled people are human. I now do a combination of writing and talks in education and other settings to try and persuade the world that we must include everyone in the action of living.
When I hear like the way Marisa writes now, kind of how profound everything that she says is, it just makes me like so, I don't know, pleased at that we did that bit of work and allowed her to have that platform really. And I think it just illustrates what we're missing from so many people, that there's so many people that have the potential to share and contribute in the way that Marisa does, that we just don't support to do that. And it's wrong really, it's trapping people and it is cruel. I can see that. I can't imagine what it would be like to like have a mind that brilliant and not be able to like share it with anybody. So I know it makes me feel quite proud that we did that and that it made a real practical difference in somebody's life.
The inclusion movement had high hopes of the Labour government of 1997, and particularly David Blunkett, a blind man who'd been segregated and left special school with no qualifications and had to go to night class at FE college for 6 years to actually be able to become a teacher in FE. So I think there was a lot of feeling that he would be the person who would develop inclusion in the UK, but it didn't quite go according to plan. And I think you also got involved in an action about 4 or 5 years into the Labour government to challenge why they were not implementing what they said they were going to do. Tell us about that.
Like end of the 90s, we weren't making as much progress as we hoped we would around inclusion, and I think maybe the fact that we had a Secretary of State for Education that was a disabled person had made us think that we might have a bit more of an ally than we necessarily did, although I do think it is difficult. I think often when you come from a minority group and you're in leadership, you almost feel like you've almost got to be like more impartial or something to, I don't know, it's a weird thing, so I don't know if that's what was happening for him, but we decided that we needed to talk to him really and just remind him. I remember us all being in the lobby and sort of spreading out and taking over basically the bottom floor of the education department and making a lot of noise and running around and singing songs and generally creating a bit of a scene, and lots of people wondering what on earth was happening downstairs, but lots of people looking over the balconies, sort of, what is happening down there. And then I think one of the civil servants came out and asked what it was we were doing, what we wanted, and we explained what we were doing. We wanted to meet with David Blunkett, and I think we stayed for a few hours until they agreed for that to happen. I think the police came at some point, and it was all quite dramatic. In the end though, we did get this meeting with David Blunkett, which happened a few days later, if I remember. So we came back to the Department of Education and met with him. And I remember him being very friendly to us and quite into the tenacity of a group of young disabled people that were organising and campaigning. I remember him being quite warm, personally quite warm to us. But I also got the impression that he was one of those people that had been put in that position, I think, where when you have an identity and you're in leadership and everybody then expects you to be able to totally change the situation for that group of people, and actually it's far more complicated than that, and often to get to those positions you kind of have to be more moderate and kind of down the middle than a lot of other people do. So my impression was that he personally understood inclusion. I remember him telling us that one of the first things he'd done was shut down the special school that he'd been to, or do something to it anyway that showed that he wasn't a fan. And I think my mum and Richard and Preeti and people had met with him a few years before, before they were in power, or the Labour government were in power, and got them to commit their education policy to being really inclusive. And I remember him saying to us in that meeting to tell Richard that he'd failed at that because the forces working against them were too powerful, which by that I think he would have meant the sort of special school lobby, the single impairment lobby, the people that make a lot of money out of siphoning off people into the segregated system, which still exists and is still is a problem now. And that, yeah, he felt like he hadn't been able to counter that all by himself. In the end, a lot of us aged out. We were really clear that it needed to be for young people under the age of 18 because they were the group of young people that were in school, and it was really important. And I think it just kind of, it was of its time in a way. A lot of us aged out and kind of moved into a role of doing similar work, but kind of in our own lives, so advocacy with other young people. I guess we branched out and did other things. People went off to university and kind of, did what people do when they're becoming young adults. But the legacy of it is still done. And I think a lot of us have done things in our lives as adults that have been really heavily influenced by those experiences that we had.
I see you as a leader, really, in the disability movement. A lot of people wouldn't see you in that way, but looking at the way you operate when you get into a group of people, you act as a leader. Why do you think you have the self-confidence to be a leader rather than a follower?
I think having experiences like being involved in young people's participation groups and stuff from an early age definitely helped. I was definitely supported to be a leader from an early age by lots of different people. I think growing up and being very well included has helped my self-confidence. I think coming from quite a radical family has helped. I think the bar of success in my family, or particularly with my parents, is like activism as opposed to academics, for sure. So I think I was encouraged by the people around me to take my thinking seriously and to want to advocate for other people and support other people. And I think I've got better at it. I think I've had to learn a lot, actually, to be an effective leader about intersectionality and being a good facilitator, listening to other people. But I think, I've got better at those things, and that's maybe made me a bit more effective.
As disabled people, we're still involved in the struggle for our human rights, although we have passed international conventions. Much of that, what is in those conventions, which governments around the world have signed up to, are not really being implemented. You got involved in the process of making the CRPD in New York. I remember you coming and us getting you on the platform to speak. What were your recollections of that process of making the convention?
What I remember about actually making the convention was, I don't know how much I learned in that sort of few weeks actually about the process involved in actually coming up with a document like that. One of my roles was to facilitate all the other young people, so the younger young people that had been sponsored to come to the conference by Save the Children. So we had a pretty big group of young people from lots of different parts of the world, and we ran a lot of consultation sessions with them over the space of the week. Actually maybe even a couple of weeks, and we were there for quite a while, and then produced a sort of report with them that we then got fed in to the conference and made sure that young people's voices were being inputted. I think I found it really fascinating, and how much of it was about making relationships with people and getting your little bit of, like, getting your 2 pence in and getting people to support your amendment and getting people to come to side meetings, and like it was a pretty new experience for me. I remember, because it wasn't just one session, we went back several times, and I remember that last session where we finally got it passed, and just the elation from everybody, and just that whole process of it all being voted in, and it all feeling a bit like a sort of game show. There's like a board with lights and it's all a bit surreal. But that being quite exciting to kind of watch that happening in front of my face, something being created like that would have that level of impact.
And now we are 12 years on from when that convention came in, and Article 7 very much puts young people at the centre of that. In those 12 years since then, what's your verdict on what's been happening? Has it been successful for young people, or what really needs to be done now to involve young disabled people around the world to fight for their rights?
There's some things that have been really great about having that. I can definitely see where we've had the opportunity to go and like do capacity building with DPOs in lots of places that we may not have done if we hadn't had that as a kind of foundation to work from. And I think it's given people confidence to go out and fight, and it's given them, yes, a kind of a thing to fight with. It's given them a tool to fight with. But I wouldn't say that we're anywhere near where we want to be in terms of implementation yet. And I think that is also partly to do with what is happening in the world at the moment, the wider context of just this slight swing towards this more sort of right-wing, free market nonsense that's going on, which is obviously completely counter inclusion and social justice and general decent human behaviour. So I think we're at a funny time, and it's probably a really important time to be organising and being kind of working in solidarity with each other and other groups and kind of trying to counter what's happening at the moment. If you look statistically, we still, you know, the numbers of young people in education, for example, haven't shot up dramatically. There's a little wiggle of improvement, but not a huge amount. So I think we've still got quite a long way to go. And I think one of the big things when we just came back from the review at the UN recently was actually that the agenda of supporting young people to develop their leadership skills seems to have dropped off a bit. There were a few groups that were doing some really good things, but there was nowhere near enough young people at that conference. There was no younger young people from what I can see, as in young people under 18. So I think a big priority for us now is around developing the capacity of young disabled leaders all over the world, so that there are people that can take up this kind of international level campaigning and keeping the pressure on, because it's not just done, is it? You don't just get the convention done, like you haven't been able to retire. Do you know what I mean? In the last 10 years you've got to keep pushing and keep pushing. One other thing is just thinking about funding for disabled people's organisations and the importance of having core funding, and just still the massive inequality between what the single impairment, able-bodied run sort of charities and projects for disabled people receive in terms of funding in comparison with disabled people-led organisations. It's like 1 to 100 or something in terms of like, it's terrible. So we really need to address that funding balance and resource disabled people-led projects properly so they can be sustainable. I do think we need young people to be able to have a platform, and I do think we need to encourage young people to lead in like a big way. I actually think young people are leading some of the more progressive stuff against loads of what's going on at the moment. Black Lives Matter, climate stuff, and like Parkland, kind of anti-gun violence stuff. Like there's loads of things that young people are really at the forefront of. And I also think that young people have actually a clearer picture of what inclusion really is. Like I'm not sure they see it just as a like disability issue, actually, that it's a wider thing about social justice and equality and creating systems that really are respectful and accessible to everybody. I really want to do some specific work supporting leadership amongst young disabled people all over the world, young people and young adults. And something great that came out of that last UN conference was the beginnings of a network of young adults who are really up for thinking about that and structuring that and working out how we resource it and what we do and how we set it all up. So that's a big project for the next year or two, is to set up a really vibrant network of young leaders and allies and mentors. And then I also want to take the things that I've learned in the inclusion movement out into the world, really. I think it's needed, so getting involved in lots of projects that are not necessarily disability specific, but using what I know, so getting involved in kind of wider political stuff with the Labour Party, stuff with Extinction Rebellion, stuff with kind of other big social justice movements, and make sure that we have a platform within them, but also that we're learning from each other, really, and bringing the things that we have learned that have been useful into those movements, things around listening to people, how to make them accessible, stuff about being an ally, intersectionality. I think they were really, really key.